Hello and good afternoon. I'm Sarah Monteleone, President of CGNA, and I appreciate you being on today's webinar. Just a few housekeeping items before we begin. Please put yourself on mute. There are 2 handouts available to download under handouts, but also those will be redistributed to you after the webinar. This webinar will be recorded and sent to all attendees, as well as posted in CGNA's Exchange Video on Demand training section. There will be time for Q&A at the end, but feel free to add your questions to the right side panel under chat. Let's get started. Johnson Controls joined CGNA organization earlier this year to support their distributor customers, but also came to the organization with a request for help and a challenge to increase the exposure and sales of 4 product families. Today is the last of 4 webinar series and is entitled How the Changes in Refrigerants Are Impacting the HVAC Refrigeration Industry. The Johnson Controls team will be discussing new low GWP refrigerants, UL standards and certifications, achieving energy savings, what to consider with connected systems, a closer look at the Johnson Controls TC series and System 450. I'm excited to introduce 3 experts from Johnson Controls: Keith Gifford, Product Manager, Anna Raschke, Associate Product Manager, and Bill Merritt, Director of Business Development. Welcome, Johnson Controls. Thank you for being a CGNA preferred vendor, and we appreciate today's information. All righty, Keith, you starting, or Bill?
Yeah, thank you for the introduction. Let's get into the slide content. The first, what we want to talk about is earlier this year, the US EPA issued SNAP Rule 25, and this is a summary of the compliance deadlines, the proposed GWP limit, and the sell-through deadline for both commercial refrigeration equipment and air conditioning and heat pumps. So you can see here that for most commercial refrigeration equipment, the GWP limit is 150 GWP. The only exception is for remote condensing units with refrigerant charge capacities less than 200 pounds. That GWP limit goes up to 300 pounds. The compliance deadline is very close, as you can see. It's January 1 of 2025, and different from other compliance deadlines, the US EPA has also put in place a sell-through deadline. So this means that you have basically 1 year from the time that you sell it, that it has to be actually installed in the field. So that means that any inventory that you may have that is installed basically does not meet the requirements of the SNAP Rule 25. Moving down into the air conditioning and heat pumps, the GWP limit is 700, so it is certainly higher. And then the compliance deadlines for residential and light commercial heat pumps is also January 1 of 2025 with a sell-through deadline of January 1, 2026. And then for variable refrigerant flow systems, that compliance deadline is 1 year later at January 1, 2026. And the sell-through deadline is January 1, 2027. Yes, there is a, I guess a petition, you could say, out there to push these deadlines out, but at this point in time, this is what the US EPA is standing behind. So most manufacturers we're working with are very aware of these deadlines and are working towards making sure they're testing and compliant. So as you can expect, we're getting, as a component supplier, we're getting a lot of questions related to it. If we can just now move to the refrigerant chart and just give everybody kind of a quick review of what an A2L is, what those refrigerants are that are currently available, and a little bit of an understanding of where they stand in terms of GWP. You can see on all these goldenrod color refrigerants, these are all the A2Ls, and the GWPs are right next to them. The three that are stacked here are all of the replacements for essentially R404A, and the interim refrigerants are R448A, R449A, and some of the other refrigerants like R407 and R452. You can see that both R454C and R455A are below the 150 GWP limit, whereas R454A is a little bit higher at 239. But keep in mind that the SNAP Rule 25 does include R454A, mainly because it's much higher in efficiency than the other two refrigerants, and it allows for a lower evaporator temperature. So from a carbon footprint standpoint, R450A is a fairly good alternative to what's out there today. Moving into the UL side of things that affects us and our controls, earlier last year, UL was getting a lot of questions on compliance and certification. And so as they kind of worked through this, they came up with two certification schemes. The first is for both A2L and A3 certification, and that's referred to as Nickel 2. And there are various ways that you, as a component manufacturer, that you can go through and get your controls certified for A2L and A3. As you can see here, I'm not going to read through them all. And then the other way is for A2Ls only, which is much easier to achieve, mainly because these are mildly flammable refrigerants and have less stringent requirements in terms of safety certification, is called LZGH2. So keep this in mind as we move forward. These are the requirements that a U.S. component manufacturer will have to achieve. These certifications will have to achieve to make your lives easier as equipment manufacturers when you're applying components. Yes, some of our controls today are ATEX certified. This is mostly a European requirement. It's much more stringent, and this is basically French for explosive atmospheres, the abbreviation is. And since we deal globally, we will have to go through some of the ATEX certifications as well. But right now, we are focused on Nickel 2 and LZGH2 certifications. So moving on, we did send out a letter to our OEM customers in April, letting them know that we have actually started working closely with UL. We actually had some series of reviews with UL in 2022. And right now, we're proud to say that our Group 1, which includes our A11 and A19 series temperature controls, most of our, or some of our pressure controls, including P20 adjustable, and then P70, P170, our oil, lube oil controls, and then our flow switches are now all through the certification process. And that certification is the LZGH2, so they're suitable for use with A2L refrigerants. How can you find out which controls are complete in terms of certification? Well, UL does have a Product IQ website, and you can search on that website under the LZGH2 E533907 document number. The other groups are, a lot of these are in process. You can see here again another series of pressure controls. These are our P77 and P78 along with our P48. These are in process with UL. Our group 3, again, more pressure controls. We're preparing for UL evaluation. And then group 4 are mainly our electronic controls. This is in process with UL. In a lot of cases, we may have to switch to what we call sealed relays and non-vented type of relays to make sure that there can't be any source of ignition with refrigerant making their way into the relay chamber. Group 5 is our pressure transducers and our P100 series encapsulated pressure switches. Again, some of these models are already ATEX certified, but as far as nickel 2, these are in process with UL. And then group 6, these are our fan speed controls. This is in process with UL as well. Group 7, we have not started the certification process, but these are our variable frequency drives. So again, these are the certifications that are going to be required for OEMs and eventually service technicians to be able to apply our controls to A2L and A3 systems. So just in a summary, how will customers identify the PENN controls that are A2L or A3 compliant? Today, initially, you'll be able to go onto UL's Product IQ website, and or you will receive a notification letter from Johnson Controls. In process, things we'll do in the future, there will be an UL identifying mark on the product label. We also will be updating all of the relevant literature, and that will denote in the literature whether the device is nickel 2 or LZGH2 certified. And for your information, all of the literature that is applicable to Johnson Control products can be found on the Knowledge Exchange platform. So here's the link here, and I believe you'll get a copy of this presentation after the webinar. Lastly, we'll be adding a refrigerant compatibility matrix to the PENN Controls product catalog. So that's another way that you can identify controls and their level of A2L and or A3 certification. So I'm going to turn it over to Anna, and she's going to talk about the TC series controls.
Yeah, thanks, Keith. So I'm going to kind of start out talking about our products now, specifically the TC series. It's an electronic temperature and defrost controller. And basically what that just means, it's sensing the temperature and deciding when the defrost cycle needs to start in like glass door freezers, refrigeration display cases, walk-in coolers. We have a video that we can show you guys that kind of just goes over what the TC is. Perfect. So I know the video just kind of went over some of the main benefits, but I'm going to go into it a little bit more. We have a very stylish and compact design when it comes to our TC series. As you can see, the front of the screen is completely flat. So that just means it has capacitive touch. This eliminates the sources of failures with mechanical keys like some of our competitors. What that just means is, I know people don't like to talk about it, but with COVID, with that happening, we have a lot of new regulations when it comes to cleaning standards and things like that. And being wiped down. What happens to some of our other competitors after you wipe them down multiple times with cleaning, disinfectants, anything, the liquid kind of gets underneath the keys and causes a lot of the failures. Ours doesn't do that since it's just a flat screen, so it's just like your phone, super easy. And with that does mean we have an IP65 rated enclosure. And our sensors as well are also IP65 rated. We do have IP67 as well as an option, but the 65 is the normal. When it comes to the intuitive functionality, our programming is pretty easy to understand. We have intuitive install instructions. I'm also currently working on how-to videos for anyone who's in the field trying to navigate using our programming functions if this is their first time. And then obviously the big one that everyone likes to talk about is our energy savings. We have our adaptive defrost. This doesn't mean you have to be using our adaptive defrost. You can use your own scheduling defrost, but we have our adaptive algorithm, which means basically right when you start using the TC, you have a calibration phase, and the controller is just learning how your display case or walk-in cooler is working, and what it does is just learns from this calibration phase and then starts its working phase, which just means that it is able to start your defrost cycle whenever it needs to. It's just going to be as efficient as possible. So after every single cycle, it gets smarter and smarter, and not just only being efficient, but also accurate. That is the #1 priority, which kind of goes into the next thing of the temperature control. It reduces the temperature swings, which just means all your food and beverage, your waste will lower, but then your quality will also increase. And then we can go to the next slide. Yep. So here are our 3 main controllers. We have our TC3224, and this is the controller that basically has everything. It has 4 outputs and can be used on almost all applications. This is our one controller that has built-in Modbus RS485, which is just the refrigeration communication that we offer. And then we offer the TC3X, which is just a reduced depth version of the TC series. Granted, these things aren't that large in general. They're just standard across all companies, but we offer a reduced depth version in case you have a specific application where you are space is a constraint. And then we have our TC3B, which is what we use with our variable speed compressor. This kind of goes back to the energy savings aspect of the TC3. When you're using a variable speed compressor, obviously efficiency is one of your #1 priorities. And this is able to compatible with Embraco, Tecumseh, basically any variable speed compressor that you need it to. And then just finally, just like a quick little overview of what the TC is. As I talked about, we had the energy savings with the adaptive defrost, but with that first controller that I talked about, the TC3224, it also has lighting controls, so it's on and off with any type of the door sensor. And then we also have open door notifications in case someone leaves the door open for too long, which causes the heat to get in. You will be notified with that. And then as well as energy savings with the variable speed compressor controller. So we do have, like I said, the communication capabilities. There's the first one with the RS-45 Modbus, and then all the rest of them can have Modbus added onto them. It's just going to be like a separate little like dongle that you add onto the TC. And then, like Keith talked about earlier about the green refrigerants, the A2L and A3 compliances. So right now, the TC works and is compatible with the A3 refrigerants with sealed relays. On standard, they do not have sealed relays, but we do have sealed relay options. So that's mostly just like the propane R290. And then we are currently working on the A2L certification, so we can get that out into production by next year, so everyone can have it by January 1, 2025.
Thanks, Anna.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now moving on to System 450. System 450 is our series of modular electronic controls. Modular meaning you can plug in, you can have different controllers, and I'll cover that in a minute. And then you can plug in, if you don't have 24 volts available, you can plug in you can use our power module, which is basically a transformer to step down 120, 208, or 240 volts down to the 24 volts required for the controller. You can also add what we call staging or expansion modules to add relay or analog output. So you can imagine the different types of applications that you can use this for. You can have a total of 10 outputs. There are 3 inputs that you can have to the controller, and those are temperature, humidity, and or pressure. And you can control on any 3 of those or one of those if you prefer at the same time. So again, if you start to think through the different applications that may require temperature and humidity, you can basically just choose and pay for the modules that you need for those particular applications. There is a backlit LCD and a touchpad user interface for configuring the devices. And then I'll talk about one of our features as well, which is a program and a transfer tool that you can use if you have, the same applications, or if you're an OEM and you have a production environment as well. Here are some photos of the various sensors that are available for use with System 450, starting with our A99 series temperature sensors. These are available in different IP-rated wiring harnesses, as well as sensor lengths. And then our P599 series pressure transducers. These are available with various outputs, various electrical connectors, various refrigerant connectors, and various pressure ranges. And then our humidity transmitters, as well as our differential pressure transmitter. As I mentioned earlier, not only can you have on-off control, but you can have also proportional and integral control. and a lot of different variables in terms of lead lag control, time switching, and many more functions within the System 450 menu structure. Just giving you kind of an overview of some of the common applications, but there are literally hundreds of applications that our customers are using System 450 on. The two here are, they don't necessarily have to be this large of a boiler or chiller, but they can be used for staging chillers and also with outdoor reset. So you can reset the water loop temperature based on the outdoor temperature, saving energy. The same thing for boilers. This is a large boiler here, but they're used on quite a few modular boilers that are used in apartment buildings or other type of central boiler plants, where you can stage boilers based on demand and again have an outdoor reset capability, whereas the temperature gets milder outside, you reset that return water or that loop temperature, again, to save energy. Condenser fans in refrigeration, both staging and system head pressure controls, another common application. I've already talked about the boilers and the chillers. The rooftop and air handler units, as you see here, that's a common applications. Walk-in coolers and freezers, damper control and actuator control, and HVAC is another common. The other common here on the combination of temperature and humidity are wine cellars, greenhouses, and clean rooms, as well as swimming pool atriums. Solar water heating is also another common application, and then static air pressure control used in a lot of healthcare facilities is another common application. So here's the lineup of controllers. What I've done here is kind of section them off. The two on the upper left are relay outputs. You can either choose a single relay or a dual relay. Then we have our analog outputs. These are proportional or proportional and integral analog outputs. And again, you can either have a single analog output or you can have a dual analog output. And then we have our two reset controllers, one with a single relay, the other with a dual relay. And then two kind of unique controllers, the C450 CPW-400. This has a 0 to 10 volt DC analog output, and this is primarily used in conjunction with electrically commutated fans, where you're varying the speed of the fan, typically based on some type of input. The other one here is the C450 CCN-4. This is what we call an application-specific controller, and it does have two relays on board, but again, you can add additional relays by adding expansion modules. This is specifically designed for use with walk-in coolers and freezers and large display cases that have remote condensers. So if, in addition to temperature control, it will also do high-low speed fan control, it will do defrost control, and it will do pump down control as well. Here's a kind of a summary of what I just went over. What I want to point out is that there are two communication modules, the CEN-1 and the CRN-1. These two modules are either Modbus, the CRN, or Ethernet, and here is the website, what the website looks like. So you can actually change settings and you can monitor the actual sensor values through the website. This does not have cloud-based connectivity, but it does allow you to remotely connect to the device by using the communication modules. I mentioned earlier there is a software program. It is available for download on the PENN website. The link is here. And again, we'll send this presentation out. It will allow you basically to configure the controller through the program, and then transfer that program through this little tool that you see here on the slide. So this USB plug would plug into your computer, and then you would take the config file and plug this 6-pin connector into the controller to transfer that file into the controller. So you can see where this would be useful to make sure that you're not having to go in and push buttons to get to the same config file. You can just use the transfer tool to do that. And as a summary, on our next generation products, things that we're considering for what we would call the System 550, an enhanced user interface is certainly on the table, going to a larger full character LCD display, getting rid of some of these 3-letter abbreviations. With a full character display, we could do that. Simplifying the menu by basically pushing a lot of the menu items that you don't need after setup to the advanced menu, and just having things like, set point, defrost, differential, and so forth in the basic menu. Cloud-based remote connectivity is certainly something that everyone is looking for. This would allow users, whether it be service technicians or end users, to set alarms and receive alarm notifications. Those alarm notifications could be either through email or text messages or both. It would also allow them, without going to just a web page, but it'll allow them from anywhere they are, through any smart device that they have, through connecting to the internet. They could review or change set points, defrost settings, and any other menu settings that are available. They could also review sensor values. In terms of energy saving functions, Anna talked about this with the TC series, but we could take that algorithm that we have and actually incorporate that into System 550 and have an intelligent defrost to be able to optimize the defrost cycle, saving energy. And then another consideration could be an unoccupied mode, where you could shift the temperature up or down depending on if you were in a heating or a cooling mode, again, saving energy, and other algorithms associated with sensor inputs, to save energy. Again, A2L and A3 refrigerants, whether we like it or not, they're coming. They're going to be here to stay. So we need to make sure that the controller and the sensors are compliant with those refrigerants. We also need to think about refrigerant leak monitoring through both A2L and A3 refrigerant sensors. And then as part of the UL requirements, 60335-2-40 and -2-89, there are requirements depending on the type of equipment for mitigation. By mitigation, I mean that if the refrigerant sensor senses that the refrigerant density in the occupied space or the cooled space reaches that 25% lower flammability limit, the system will need to be shut down. You will need to turn off any ignition sources. So that would be like a defrost function, electric defrost primarily. You would have to isolate the refrigeration system and then turn on evaporator fans. And in some cases, the equipment will require exhaust fans to exhaust that refrigerant out of the room and getting it below that 25% lower flammability limit. As part of the requirement, the system will be locked out for a minimum of 5 minutes, and it will have to be manually reset through the control function, through the control menu. The other thing is that these sensors typically on the refrigerant side have a life of about 15 years. So certainly you're going to want to be notified when those sensors either get to the end of life or they have a problem with them, they're out of calibration. And so end of life sensor notifications is another aspect of A2L and A3 refrigerants. So that is the end of our content that we're talking about today. I'll open it up to Bill if you want to make any other comments than what either myself or Anna have made during this this webinar.
No, I think we're good, Keith. Why don't we, Sarah, we can open it up for any questions that the audience may have.
Okay, great. I actually have 3 that came in. The first one, and this probably is pretty easy to answer. This individual is just needing to understand where he can find the list of products and individual SKUs discussed today. Where would they find that? Is that on the Johnson site or?
The best place to find Johnson Controls literature is on the Knowledge Exchange platform. So if you go to any of your search engines, whether it's Google or Yahoo or any of the other search engines, and type in Johnson Controls followed by the word Knowledge Exchange, it's going to be the first URL that comes up. If you click on that and then type in the product name or something associated with the product, you'll see that it will be highlighted as one of those literature items.
Perfect. Okay. The second question is if you could backtrack and retouch on that earlier slide, Keith, that you showed about the UL requirements for the components used for A2L and A3 refrigerants.
Sure.
And just kind of quickly, I guess, review that again.
Yeah, so I think this is the slide that you're referring to.
It might have been the one, yeah, I guess so. I'm sorry, A2L and A3.
Okay. So this specifically refers to components, which includes controls. In order to make it easier for an equipment manufacturer, any equipment manufacturer that's going to use components that could have a source of ignition, because both of these have some degree of flammability, right? And A2Ls are mildly flammable, A3s are highly flammable. What UL is really concerned about here is to make sure that the refrigerant doesn't get in contact with the source of ignition. So to make these controls, any control that will be used in A2L or A3 systems, they have divided this into 2 categories. The first is for both refrigerants, A2L and A3. And this certification is called Nickel 2. So these essentially are ignition-proof components. And there is a number of ways that you can go about as a manufacturer like ourselves, go away and go through and qualify these with UL to make sure that they meet these requirements and are certified for use with either of the 2 refrigerants. That's Nickel 2. If they're only going to be used for A2Ls, then the second path is the LZGH2. And that is really, there are 3 ways here. And the first way is making sure that the openings to any ignition are small enough so that the refrigerant really can't get to the source of ignition. That's what Anna and I both talked about with respect to electronic controls. Some electronic controls use relays that have small vent holes in them. If they are small enough, typically the molecules of refrigerant can't get to the source of ignition. But the other alternative is to use what we call sealed relays to make sure there are actually no openings and the refrigerant has no way or path to get to that source of ignition.
Okay, Keith, and with CGNA distributors, I would assume that this certification information would be on product specification or data sheets.
Yeah, so what we talked about is that it's going to be a work in process because we have literally thousands of controls that we'll have to go through and change what is on the product label. UL has identified a mark as well as content that can be added to that product label that identifies it as either nickel 2 or LZGH2. So that we will be adding these product labels. We will also be updating all of our literature for any control that will be used on either A2L or A3 systems. We will be updating our literature to include the indication of the certifications. And then lastly, we will be adding a refrigerant compatibility matrix to the PENN Controls product catalog. And by the way, you can also find this PENN Controls product catalog on the Knowledge Exchange platform. And here's the link to the Knowledge Exchange platform.
Keith, for our customers who are contractors and wholesalers, as we go forward with the new controls for A3s and A2Ls, will those controls be backwards compatible for servicing other products out there also? Older products?
Yeah, good question, Bill. Actually, there's kind of a two parts to that question. One is does that mean that, for instance, if we look at the controls that are now LZGH2 compliant, does that mean that all of the controls that are on wholesaler shelves can be used for A2Ls? We have that question out with UL to clarify whether or not that is after the certification date, or because we haven't changed any of the design, are all of those controls grandfathered in? So that's an open question that we have with UL. The question that you asked specifically is yes. Once a control is either nickel 2, meaning it can be used for both A2L and A3, or LZGH2, meaning it can only be used for A2Ls, these are also backwards compatible because none of the existing refrigerants other than propane have a flammability element to them. Okay, so that would be the only exception, is that the existing controls in terms of backwards compatibility typically are ATEX compliant for use with propane, but now with these new certifications, they would have to be nickel 2 to be used with an A3 or propane.
Okay, great. I think I have one last question, unless there's any more popping up. Just if you could, Keith or Anna or Bill, whoever's appropriate, there was a question on what is the US EPA's proposed timeline for HVAC refrigeration equipment requiring the use of low GWP refrigerants? I know you had mentioned, yeah, something on your slide, but if you could go back to that.
Yeah, Bill, you might want to talk a little bit more broader about what the, I guess the petition is that's out there.
Sure, Keith. Today, as it stands, that it's January 25 on heat pumps and AC for light commercial and residential, and then on variable refrigerant flow systems, it's 26. Now, the thing that's in play here still is the sell-through date. Today, the government is trying to make it 1 year, which means you have to install the product within 1 year, not you can sit in inventory and keep it forever. They want to kind of cut off some of the things that happened with the dry charge 22 product over the years. But there is a petition, AHRI, and a number of the associations are pushing to try and see if they can loosen that up and extend that through an install date to more than 1 year.
Okay, great.
I think what you're saying, Bill, is these are the dates as we know them. And
Yes,
then
today.
as of October, right, there'll be a final ruling. Is that correct?
On or around October 7th, we're supposed to have a final ruling, and at that point, it'll lock it down. It doesn't give us a lot of time. We're pretty much down to almost a year at that point. From what we understand, there's not going to be a lot of changes, but we'll know for sure in October.
And I assume every OEM is going through these compliancy deadlines and requirements, right? So our distributors are, going through this obviously with Johnson products, but other refrigeration and HVAC components as well.
Yeah, I was just in Washington in May for AHRI meetings on Capitol Hill, talking to lawmakers with a group from the industry, both on refrigeration and HVAC, and everybody's going through these same issues, whether it's an OEM for equipment, right? Our folks on the wholesale and contracting side, we're all in this together. What you see is what you get on the screen right now. Just said final ruling in October, but there are requests out there with the government to see if we can extend some of these dates, the sell through or install date being one of those.
Okay. All righty. Well, great. Well, Bill, Keith, Anna, thank you so much for your time. CGNA distributors, again, we will send you a copy of this presentation. You can also find it on the CGNA Exchange under our on-demand video portal. And we'd like to thank Johnson Controls once again for another educational webinar. We appreciate you guys very much.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. Take care. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you all.